It's a competitive field, I grant you that, but is Lee Anderson the most obnoxious Conservative MP that there is? As far as I can tell, at least stock in trade is just saying obnoxious things he knows will annoy anyone vaguely to the left of Genghis Khan. Now, his latest target is food bank users. Now, I'm glad someone's finally holding food bank users to account. I know some might say, shouldn't we talk about the super rich and big business who avoid tax on an industrial scale when we're told there isn't enough money for basic services which we all depend on? Or maybe bosses who pay their workers poverty wages, simply don't pay them properly at all. Or indeed Tory politicians who presided over the longest squeeze in living standards in generations while reducing British society to the status of uncontrollably burning skip. But what about those who've been reduced so far down to hardship that they've been referred to food banks to feed themselves and their children? Where is their accountability, I ask you? Well, that is, of course, where Lee Anderson, our knight in shining armour, finally comes over to rescue us from this blight in society, those reduced to poverty and hardship because of the policies of his political party. Now, I think it's worth a bit of context. Lee Anderson's salary of £84,000 a year as a backbench MP puts him in the top 3 or 4%, the top 3 or 4% of earners in this country, not including, of course, the expenses that he has. MP's pay has gone up by about 30% since 2010 when the government came to power and have since suppressed the wages of millions of people with their calamitous policies. Now, Lee Anderson decided to roll out his parliamentary assistant, completely appropriately, which I'll talk about, that she's doing absolutely fine what he was paying her, less than £30,000 a year. So why couldn't everybody else? Now, his argument was, rather than being the victims of imposing living standards, those who depend on food banks are simply bad at budgeting. Now, here's what I said about this on the Jeremy Vine show.
I agree with what he's actually saying in the sense that different circumstances. I mean, if you're in the north, obviously it's not the same as if you're in London. Prices are different, so you've got to take case by case. But often you will find that people, they will be buying ready meals and expensive takeaways. They will still not cut back on their entertainment going out. And I think it's sad thing. When I was at school, they used to do a class called Commerce, and we were taught then how to keep books up to trial balance, and we understood that, and we were taught the difference between retail and wholesale, so it gave you a basic start.
Do you think, Owen, that there is a budgeting problem for some people who use food banks?
No, if you speak to anyone who runs a debt charity or the debt sector, they'll tell you that people on modest incomes are the best at budgeting because they have to be. The reason people end up in financial hardship overwhelmingly isn't because they're frittering away their cash. It's because we're in a cost of living crisis in which people have had the longest squeeze in wages now since the Battle of Waterloo, where you have more people in poverty in working households. So it's people who earn their poverty, if you like. I mean, look, he brings up his research, I have to say, woeful, just unbelievably, wildly inappropriate behaviour for an MP to use their staff as social media fodder, because there's a balance of power issue there. If he asks his member of staff to drag them all over social media, they don't really have a choice but to say yes. But in terms of the personal circumstances he's come up with, in terms of his the person working for, I mean, good luck. The fact she's managed to find £775 per month for a central London room. I know lots of people who rent in central London. I have absolutely no idea how she's managed to get that cheap. But in any case, her circumstances are different from, say, a nurse. Now, the average wage, he would say, of a nurse is £35,000. That means half of nurses earn less than 35 grand, incidentally. But if you are a nurse, a single... Well, that's how averages work. That's how averages work. If an average means 50% earn less...
You're a median or a mean.
Sorry?
Or... OK, let's not get... Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we're talking about the median.
OK, right.
The median earning is what he was referring to.
Yeah.
But if you're a nurse with 3 kids living in central London, you're not going to be renting a single room. Your outgoings are going to be far, far higher. And if you have inflation where basic goods, well, it's about 10, 11%, but the cost of food is going up above the actual inflation rate, including many of those essential goods, if your wages, you've lost £5,000 a year since 2010, If you've got, as I've said, those kids and benefits have also been frozen or cut, then you're going to drive people to food banks. It's not because they're budgeting
So they're
badly.
being
it's
driven
because of
there. That's the
circumstance.
point.
Now, of course, this is what Thatcherism sought to do. It sought to stop us thinking about poverty as a social problem caused by an unjust society, by an economic order which has huge amounts of wealth within it, but which concentrates that wealth in too few hands, leaving millions of people who play a critical role in creating that wealth without enough to sustain themselves to provide a comfortable existence for them and for their family. So by stopping us thinking of it as a collective problem needing a collective solution, instead they made us think it's about individual failings, about character faults, that people simply don't work hard enough. It's your fault, you're lazy, you don't have enough can-do attitude, you brought it on yourselves, you're not bright, all that kind of stuff. You could almost call it the demonisation of the working class. Someone should write a book about it. Now, I just want to get these figures right about nurses, which I referred to. Band 5 nurses, that's in terms of what they're paid, which pay band they're in, that's 42% of nurses, and their salaries range between £27,000 and £33,000. Now, nurses, in real terms, have lost around £5,000 since 2010 annually. Now, bear in mind, pre-existing, if you like, to the current crisis, there's childcare costs. We have one of the most expensive childcare systems in the Western world, which devours a huge chunk of people's incomes. We have a housing crisis where many of these key workers would have been in council housing before. About 40% of the council homes flogged off under right to buy are now owned by private landlords charging twice the rent. Many younger workers, including nurses, don't own their own homes. And if they do, obviously now face a mortgage spike thanks to Liz Truss. But they privately rent. A big chunk of their income goes on private landlords charging often rip-off rents. They've endured real terms cuts to in-work benefits, which of course millions of working people depend on, given, as I've said, most people in poverty in Britain are in work. And then at the same time, they suddenly have to contend with a surge in prices in food. Food prices, of course, have gone up even more, many basic food items, than the headline rate of inflation, which is already disastrous enough, went up to about 11%, now down to 10%. That doesn't mean inflation's, the prices are going down. It means that the rate at which they increase isn't as steep. And of course, their energy bills, which they have to pay, not least in freezing cold temperatures, those energy bills have gone up. That's the reality. And we're just talking about nurses there. That's why some of them have been, if they, for example, a single parent, they've got kids, that has driven people into hardship. And I think it says everything about society, because people are like, what? You're saying a nurse, for example, who might be on 27 grand, how could they possibly be reduced to those circumstances? That's the damning indictment of the country we live in. That we live in such a broken society that rips everyone off for basic needs, from childcare to housing, that not just people whose wages or salaries you'd look at and think, well, actually, that clearly puts them in a position of hardship, but people who would be classed as middle income struggle in this society. That's the real scandal, not people not being able to budget. It's a complete myth, a lie about people not being able to budget shouldn't be causing, for example, a surge in food banks. Like what the Tories want us to believe, given food banks surged in 2010, is that when they took over, for some reason, people suddenly became bad at budgeting. So I don't know, are they going to take any accountability for that? That they suddenly think, we came to power and then huge numbers of people were no longer able to budget properly. Maybe it wasn't that. Maybe that doesn't make any sense because it's clearly unhinged gibberish. And actually what happened is they instituted a series of policies that caused the longest squeeze in living standards, as I've said, for workers for generations. As I've said, the Battle of Waterloo. Yeah, I think that's, Occam's razor, the simplest explanation being the most likely. I think we can rely on that. That's the truth. And the likes of Lee Anderson, who just tries to posture as man of the people and all the rest of it, who is a very handsomely paid member of parliament, who represents a Conservative Party which has driven huge numbers of people below the breadline, including people who were not struggling before. That is a critical point and crucial to understanding the mess that this country's in. Is he the most obnoxious Tory MP there is? There's quite a lot of them, if I'm going to be brutally honest with you. So I wouldn't want to stick that label on him, because it is a highly competitive market. But he's got to be up there, hasn't he? Please like, subscribe, and do support us on patreon.com/ownjoes84. See you in a bit.